The composer I chose for this final project and presentation is Debussy. To start off, let me give you a brief summary of his background. Claude Achille Debussy was born in 1862 and then passed away in 1918 from cancer. He was born in France to a middle-class family and was the oldest of 5 children. At the age of 10, he began studying at a conservatory in Paris, first as a pianist and then as a composer. In his social life, it appears that he chose a friend group consisting of poets, painters, and musicians, so overall very creative people. And I will be talking some more about that in just a moment. His style could definitely be considered impressionistic. That's how many people have labeled him in the music world. And Impressionism was a movement happening in the art world at the time. Some of the most famous artists of this style you have more than likely heard of, such as Claude Monet, Pablo Picasso, and Vincent van Gogh. But Debussy's music could also be closely associated with the idea of symbolism. Many of his friends were symbolist poets, and their work greatly influenced his music. In this style of poetry, the traditional syntax is often disrupted, and the same idea occurs in his music. Debussy accomplished symbolism in the music through the way he used his motives, harmonies, and exotic scales and various other elements. The author of the book, Concise History of Western Music, Barbara Vassano-Hanning, says that Debussy's mature works are shaped more by contrasts of timbre and texture than by traditional formal devices or tonal function. An example would be that instead of taking a motive and developing it, as was the standard and traditional way of doing it, he would either repeat it or use it in less traditional ways. Next, I wanted to take a moment to familiarize you with some of Debussy's most famous and well-loved works. The piano works that he wrote a lot of piano works. One is The Joyous Isle, and then Estampes, Images, Children's Corner, which is very fun, and if you're a pianist, you've probably played something from there, such as Gollywog's Cakewalk. And then we have Clair de Lune, 2 Arabesques, La Cathedral and Glaudi, which translated is The Sunken Cathedral, and then Pour le Piano. And there are some others, but those are some of the most popular ones. Some orchestral music that he wrote were the 3 Nocturnes, and instead of trying to pronounce the titles, I'll just tell you the English translations. The first is Clouds, and then Festivals, and then Sirens, as in Greek mythology. And then we also have La Mer, which is translated the sea. Okay, so now let's jump into the piece that I selected for this project, the Prelude from Pour le Piano. Pour le Piano was composed in 1901, and it consists of 3 parts, the Prelude, Sarabande, and Toccata. This was actually the first keyboard composition that he had written after a 10-year break from writing any form of keyboard music. And knowing this causes the assumption that this piece must have been written with much vigor. I believe that because of the break, Debussy wrote it with new fire and energy, and in my opinion, those qualities should be brought out when performing the piece, for sure. So, looking at the key signature, it appears that the piece is in A minor. But very quickly, we see Debussy's revolt against the traditional tonalities and harmonies in his use of modes. Up until this point, modes had not been used for many musical generations. But starting right at measure 6, we can see his use of the Aeolian mode, which is like what we consider the minor mode. It's very apparent, just at the very beginning of the piece. Then when we get to measure 10, we find a lot of fluctuating tonal centers. In this section, Debussy wrote a cadence within each measure, and this causes the music to quickly transition through various keys. This suggests the idea of pantonality. This idea of pantonality is the idea of extending tonality to all keys, and it's similar to what we studied about in 12-tone music this semester. After that section, we feel a startling change to the key of C major. This is followed by a series of augmented triads, and this is in the excerpt I've included in the slideshow. If you follow along in the excerpt, you will find that the right-hand top notes at the beginning of each measure up until the glissando are C, B flat, A flat, and F sharp. This outlines a whole tone scale. So in this little section, we've got that at the beginning of each measure, along with a lot of chromatic movement between the voices. And the section's very explosive, so it's a lot of, between the whole tone and chromatic combination, it's very startling for listeners. Then directly after that augmented triad section, we find a whole tone scale in measure 57. And then the next section continues the whole tone scale with a lot of chromatic movement as well. For the entire page, basically, we hear it rising chromatically in both hands with an oscillating pattern in the right hand. And you can see this in the excerpt I've included on this slide, where the right hand's vibrating back and forth like a trill chromatically or in whole tone patterns. So he's still bringing that chromatic and whole tone combination, even in this part of the piece. Then from measures 71 to 96, we remain solely in the A flat whole tone scale. So it's a lot less dissonant because he's taken out the chromatics at this point. But he stays within just the whole tone scale for 26 measures. And he plays around with the harmonies and creates a very beautiful and, in my opinion, rather ethereal sound. And then right after that, we have a recap of the A Aeolian, pantonal, and intense augmented triad sections again. So a lot of the piece is repeat. After some more A-flat whole tone material, we have a beautiful section that seems to be composed of combined whole tone and A Aeolian material descending and ascending. This is right before the cadenza, so it starts off really quiet, and then you've got the right hand descending and the left hand ascending in octaves, and gets very intense and loud, and just the combination of whole tone and the Aeolian material is just beautiful. And then, as you've probably noticed by now, Debussy seems to be pulling from two main subject materials, if you will. These being the whole tone scale and modal material. The cadenza on the last page is interesting in that it showcases these two ideas he's been bringing into this piece side by side. We have a B Locrian scale, which consists of the same notes as the A Aeolian scale, alternating with a whole tone scale. And you can see that in the example there. So after alternating between these two scales in the cadenza section with very fast arpeggiated notes, we find a return to tempo 1 with powerful chords that continue the alternating between modal and whole tone pattern. You can see this in the excerpt included in the slide. And then finally on the last chord, he closes out the prelude with a full and powerful 1 chord, returning us to original key of A minor. And that sums up my presentation on Debussy in this prelude. I hope you enjoy listening to this piece. It's very fun, very exciting, a lot of fire to it.